Spence's comment?
Yes, thank you. What Mr. Spence read is an accurate reading of the eligibility recommendation and what's known as the PLAF statement. That's a mouthful, present level of academic achievement, function, and performance, I believe. And that is that what he read out of a 21-page report is verbatim from the school psychologist's 8-page report that also makes the point that medical documentation on ADHD has not been obtained. That is a critical factor for eligibility for ADHD. ADHD is a medical diagnosis. There is testing, such as the Connors test that's referenced in the report. There's anecdotal information from parents, from teachers, from the student himself, from looking at behaviors such as have been shared that would suggest, as the PLAF statement does state, that it is suggestive of behaviors associated with ADHD. Kind of like clue. But for eligibility under the law for ADHD, as well as under Section 504, you have to have a medical diagnosis. The school district cannot obtain that on behalf of the student. That is something that the parent must provide to the school district. And so I think that the psychologist in this very detailed report is making the point, and it shows up in the psychologist's report as well as in the PLAF statement, that here are some signals that concern us. But by law, and I am inserting the word by law, the psychologist didn't, they can't reach that conclusion without the medical documentation. And they said, if it is provided, we should revisit that. That is, in my legal opinion, an appropriate statement. It is being honest and genuine with the data and information that is being provided to this MET team. They didn't ignore it. They didn't flush it off to the side. It was in the psychologist's report, and it wasn't buried in the report. It was put in the PLAF statement. But they also couldn't find eligibility. All 4 of them checked the MET form that said not eligible under what's known as OHI, which is the ADHD eligibility factor, because there's not a medical documentation. So I, as a matter of law, am not troubled by that. The manifestation determination review team could not look at that because there's no medical documentation of that diagnosis.
Wasn't it said earlier that, in fact, he was at some point in his academic career diagnosed with ADHD?
3rd grade.
In the 3rd grade? So at one point he was. But at some point it expired, for lack of a better term, or was removed?
The parent requested, there's documentation in the record that the parent requested no further eligibility under special education, and by law, that parent wish must be respected. The school cannot force it.
And so then how did we come in 2014 to have the diagnosis for disability for math? How did that come?
Because it's not a diagnosis. A learning disability, unlike ADHD, is not a medical piece.
Okay.
And this, I presume that the parents signed an evaluation because this could not take place without parent authorization.
And so that's why I'm asking the question. If it took place for purposes of math, given the history and the behavior, I'm wondering why he wasn't reevaluated for other
They did. They evaluated him specifically for ADHD.
But there was no medical documentation.
That is not the school's responsibility. We do not send children to medical doctors.
That is fact. So in other instances where kids demonstrate behavior where ADHD may be apparent and present, how does the parent come to know that and know to take the child for an evaluation? I understand the school plays no part in the role, but does the school, do the school and the parent, this is a child, and the parent and the school district are to work together. If the school district suspects an issue and a problem, and there's no communication with the parent, how are the child's shortcomings begun to be addressed? Do you understand what my question is? Clearly, it's and what's in the report kind of supports my line of questioning earlier based on the behavior that I see here, and that nothing happened, but the behavior continued. There was no other outcome that we could have expected, but the one that we're here for today.
I disagree with your conclusion that nothing happened. This school district took significant efforts.
Let me qualify my statement further, Ms. Swim. Nothing happened with regard to further evaluation medically of this young man to determine whether or not he had any emotional disabilities. Having said that, what is an appropriate consequence? We're to answer that question. What are we to base that question on?
The conduct. The code of conduct and the student's behavior. The special education issues are solely dependent on the IEP team and the special education law process. Again, with all due respect, that is not the province of the Board of Education. So, in summarizing my response to your question, if you find the conduct occurred factually, and then you must determine what is the appropriate consequence. You've heard the recommendation from your administrative team, and you look at the record, because it's also alleged persistent disobedience and pattern of misconduct. And you look at the conduct that occurred on May 22nd and draw your conclusions.
Only the conduct that occurred on May 22nd?
No, and the allegation is also for persistent disobedience and pattern of misconduct, and that's outlined in specific terms in Mrs. Cermak's letter, where she identifies additional conduct of a similar nature.
Mr. Sharp, are you ready to hear from family, the students' representatives?
I am, Madam Chair, to the rest of the board.
Move on?
Great, and I appreciate the patience and the time you've expended with the administration position, and I hope I can also have some of that time. When this case first came to me, I wondered why Okemos Schools was going to put an expulsion on the record of this young man. We heard the principal talk about her rationale that for the protection of the students and the safety, and they didn't want to work with him. Why would she say that when she already knows he's moved out of the district, has no intentions of coming back? That this expulsion that you are now contemplating is going to keep him out of school in hope where they're ready to admit him for 6 months to a year. Why would you do that? It's not for the benefit of Okemos Public Schools. It's punitive, it's vindictive, it's thoughtless. And the reason I said it that way is because you see this problem time and time again, particularly when you're dealing with kids with special needs, when you're dealing with kids who are of color, of lower socioeconomic class. They get stigmatized, people speculate, and then they send them down the river because they are expendable. I told you I'm with the ACLU. I'm not here representing them, but it is a known problem that kids, especially kids of color, are being subjected to discipline much more aggressively than other kids who are, quote, normal. One of the things that I left on your table is the fact that as of last week, the State Board of Education adopted a guideline saying you're doing this much too aggressively generally throughout the state. You're causing us problems with the feds. The feds have put together guidelines saying you're suspending people needlessly, you're ruining their lives. So you've got this guideline. The action that you're talking about now, totally outside the guideline. This kid could come back to Okemos if he had a behavioral plan. But he chose, his parent chose, to just take him somewhere where he was welcome and they're willing to work with him. So if that's the case, why are we wasting our time while you try to suspend him and then expel him? What do you accomplish other than ruining his life or making it worse? That's the first issue. You know, I'm trying to understand why they do this. We already touched on the fact that we're dealing here with a kid with special needs behavior, so I'm not going to expound on that at this point. Because this originated as a special ed type of situation leading to that manifestation hearing and so forth, you know, and I may be wrong, I don't practice this area of law, but I believe that at some point the parent has to be offered an opportunity to agree or reject the proposal, and there's supposed to be a signature.
There's no longer a signature requirement. That rule changed a few years ago.
Right. But in any case, you're asserting as facts things that my client doesn't even agree with. And we'll find out more about it. You know, like I said, I'm somewhat disappointed because we have here people giving you hearsay what they think, what they speculate, what they believe that Ms. Holmes said or meant. This occurred in third hour. You know, I just got the email today. Fine. The kid was allowed to stay in school through 3 other classes until 6, and only after he left was he notified that he was suspended and going to be expelled. If he was that dangerous and that much of a threat, why are you leaving there for the rest of the school day? Inconsistent with the logic and the position you're taking. Timothy has his problems and issues. And when we go through, I'm going to talk to the 2 witnesses here I'm going to call. You know, they say he was threatening. It's not even obvious that he was threatening. That's a subjective standard. You're dealing here with a kid that's used to talking a certain way. You know, I'm going to jack you up. I'm going to make you sorry, stuff like that. Is that a threat? Well, from his perspective, it wasn't meant as a threat. Even one of the instances where you cite, he threatened, somebody said, oh, I didn't mean that as a threat. But you take it as a threat because you're intimidated by his language. The other kids talk that way. You know, so what's going on here with it so special with this kid when he makes some statement like that? He has goals, he has aspirations, he's making progress. He finally got into an adult, I mean not adult, but a special education program that is showing progress. He's not the best student, but he's trying. When you look at that guideline, when you look at this school to prison pipeline that we talk about, where people get kicked out of school and where do they end up in prison? Why are you kicking out a kid for something like this? You think he's going to be disruptive of the school more than he's been in the past, more than other kids? You just are not ready to deal with it. So he wants to leave. Let him leave and go someplace where he can be better received and have another chance. Don't punish him by keeping him out of school for a year anywhere else. And you all know he's not even a candidate for schools of choice because he's been suspended. So he's going to be going where he resides, in Hope. Are you wasting taxpayer money? Only if, no, but you're only not if you're trying to protect Hope. And Hope public schools can take care of themselves. And hopefully Tim can.
Excuse me, Mr. Spence?
I didn't interrupt you.
No, that is very fair. I'm just wondering, sir, if I could have 2 minutes of your time out in the hall.
Yes, I'd love to talk with you.
Thank you.
If it's okay with the chair.
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
Can that happen without your participation, Madam Chair? That's called sidebar. I'm just kidding.
As representatives from both sides of it.
I had an opportunity to review something, and it was important to review it outside of the board. So,
We motion to
A motion
adjourn, so we need to ask me
to recess.
Oh, recess.
So, do we need a motion to come out of recess? Or I just call the recess?
Where we convene from recess.
I just want to make sure it doesn't have to be a motion. Correct?
I think you can just declare.
That's what I'm
saying.
just
Yeah,
advised.
okay, yeah. Yes, so I just wanted to note that we are now reconvening. And Mr. Spence did have the floor,
He did.
so I would
It is his
defer to
floor.
him.
Yes.
And then if he would like to defer to you, that's fine, but I would like it was,
Okay, I need to continue with my statement.
if that is where we left off and that's where you'd like to continue.
Right, because we have not gotten to any aspect of witnesses, so. Well, in any case, where I was basically a public policy issue. Why would you want to punish this kid? What is the objective that you hope to occur? What joy, what pleasure, what benefit to the Okemos Public School system? I think we'll find out when I ask that apparently the witnesses realize that this is something that will likely potentially change his life. So I'm not going to go further with my statement. I'm just going to call witnesses, if I may, and ask questions.
Yeah, I believe, I mean, you don't have to call witnesses, it's just
The procedure says I can call witnesses.
well, we don't call them witnesses, but you certainly can you can ask clarifying questions to the administration.
You can ask questions to witnesses.
Right.
You can ask questions to people, but Ms. Kreitz, we can't help ourselves, we're attorneys.
Thank you. I want to make sure that it's not a court of law here.
It is not a court of law.
It's a process.
Mr. Spence and I are deliberating under the oppression of being attorneys and calling other people witnesses.
And I'm learning about school.
It isn't here.
So,
It is a hearing.
It
I'm
is a
still
hearing.
reading that, so. Public hearing. I'd like to ask some questions, first of all, of the assistant principal.
Yes, Russ Merrill.
Okay, you support the expulsion. Why?
It's pretty much been outlined that the pattern of behavior, the threatening statements toward our teacher, and it is covered in the handbook, which is adopted by the Board of Education, as far as threats made toward an adult in our building.
I see.
So I support that.
You obviously don't expel everybody that makes a threat toward an adult, do you?
That's a tough question. I don't recall before these incidences when we've had threats towards an adult.
You say that
I don't
Mr.
recall.
Stewart is the first person expelled for being mouthy.
I wouldn't call it mouthy. It falls in our handbook as intimidation or threat to school.
I see. Now, it's a shame that Ms. Holmes is not here. You don't know if she was intimidated or not, do you?
I know from her statement how she felt.
Right, you don't know this.
From her statement,
But you don't know, do you?
I'm pretty sure you can't.
So I thought you can. And you don't know what occurred in that classroom that day, other than what you heard from Ms. Holmes and read in that email. Is that correct?
And what Tim told me in my office when I discussed it. That's correct. I'm not in that classroom.
Right.
We leave that up to teachers to determine and dialogue with us accounts or things, incidences that occur. I can't be in the classroom or any classroom all the time. We just don't have the personnel to do that.
I see. Now, you have had a lot of contact with him.
A lot.
Okay. Is he a problem?
He has behavior issues that he goes to high school with.
He had a behavior issue. The issue that he did on the 22nd, is that alone enough to expel him?
No, that's not why we're expelling. There has been a pattern of behavior of doing that. He's done it 4 times. The first time, I went, okay, then we gotta learn from this, you can't happen again. I didn't expel him or move to expulsion, or talk to anyone about expulsion the first time.
Who recommended that he be expelled? Was that you or was that the principal?
We collaborate as a team, and only the principal can recommend to the board the expulsion.
Who initiated the recommendation?
I would say I initiated it because I was the original person dealing with this incident and all the other incidences.
Do you regard Tim as being a threat to the other students?
His behavior would lend itself that he is a threat to other students. He's been in a fight, he is a female student. I would say yes.
He hit a female student. You know that?
Yes.
Okay, that's not the record. That's not why he's expelled.
It's that pattern or persistent pattern of disruption and behavior that's why he's
So when he hit the student that you recall, that wasn't enough to expel him? No. So when did it become enough to expel him or be enough?
For the 4th time, threatened one of our staff.
Okay. Now, what is the threat that you see in those words?
I see those as a threat, and the teacher took those as a threat.
Yeah,
So, do I have kids?
yes.
That's really irrelevant.
It is, but you're not the attorney. You
Well,
have to-
I don't answer that.
Okay.
Mrs.
I don't think
Price,
that's
I
not an
object.
relevant
All right,
question.
well, I'm going to a different question.
I don't need to
I'm not going to
know.
reply.
And this, with all due respect, cross-examination is not a requirement of due process. Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled that. And the Board of Education, your procedures say that each side may ask questions to clarify, to obtain some different additional information that may be helpful to the board in making a decision. But it's not cross-examination, and you're engaging in cross-examination.
What is it about my questions that's not helpful to the board in making a decision?
It's the manner in which you're asking the questions, first and foremost.
It's my personality. I'm P.O.
Well, then I think it's important to be respectful of the
Okay,
administrators.
I will move on. You made your
Thank
point.
you.
And, we'll just basically see what's going on. You gave me something to look at. Code of conduct. You have a copy of that in front of you? Okay, the last 2 pages apparently is the table.
Did I mention that?
Well, no, that's another thing. I only deal with what you've given me in my file. Before today's hearing, for me to understand why you didn't get out of school at once. So what you just gave me is called
Code of Conduct, select policy. 5144.
I have.
I haven't.
Okay. Attachment A. Where is the criteria that you use to justify expelling this student? First.
Pattern, persistent disobedience.
But where are you reading? I'm looking at the left side, it says prohibited activity.
Okay.
So which infractions is Mr. Stewart? I'm dealing with this. This is what you gave me.
We also provided you the code of conduct as well
Right,
as
I'm
outlined in
doing-
all letters that you received.
Right, but I'm dealing with what you gave me. This is your code of conduct. That supersedes your handbook, doesn't it? No?
No.
Is it inconsistent?
No.
Okay, well then, within what I'm looking at, which of those criteria?
Disruptive conduct is in there.
Disruptive, it starts with a D.
That it does.
May include detention or suspension. Okay.
Insubordination starts with an I.
Okay, and since you are reading it, what is insubordination? Is that defined?
Sure, and it's defined actually in our handbook. It's probably defined in here
Page
as well.
55.
Okay, I better get the handbook and read it for the first time. 2013 and 2014. While I'm getting that, did Tim get a copy of this?
We did.
Every year you change it.
Pardon me?
Every year you change it.
Correct. And every year what we do is we post it on our website. We make it available for students if they would like a hard copy. And when they fill out the registration forms, I have read the handbook and agree to it and sign it on the emergency cards. Parents and students sign it, yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
you were sure you read it or had it?
I would have to probably go back and look at the card, but my assumption is if we're able to contact the parents and have their addresses, that form is signed.
Okay, page 57. Now, you were going there, what are you going to point at? Page 55.
Number 9.
Number 9, there's a definition of insubordination.
Okay, let's see what it is here in the school setting. Page 55, you said?
Yes.
Did Tim fail to comply with instructions that were given to him by Ms. Holmes?
Yes.
How?
Well, when she asked him to stop and go to work, he responded by making a threat. So that's insubordination. He didn't stop and do his task or go to work. In that particular case, that is
Well, how do you know he didn't stop and do his work?
the teacher said that.
Did she say that in her note? He did not stop and do his work.
He was,
You're reading a lot in there.
I've
I
called-
follow with you.
Well, you talked to her. You doesn't.
Oh, yeah, and I talked to her.
You
called this. I got it in writing from an email that she sent over on the incident. So instead of responding to a simple request, she was just go to work, do your work, whatever the reading is, he responded by making a threat to her.
Okay, that's your understanding of what happened.
It is.
Okay.
The other one, the third one, and.
Oh, wait, before you go, I'm finished reading the definition of insubordination. So that's the only part of insubordination that you think he's guilty of having done. The rest of this is not relevant. He didn't leave the school property, that stuff is not the reason you say he's insubordinate. Okay, what's the next one?
It's under assault, physical, verbal, or written, and we're looking at the first part of that on your chart under A, and we're looking at the first part of, which is referring to the employee, volunteer, or contractor.
Okay, now just a moment, let me catch up with you. It wasn't a physical assault, was it?
No.
Okay, so it's not the first paragraph then. He didn't assault an employee, volunteer, or contractor.
Oh, sorry. It would be the second paragraph.
Second paragraph
Physical
talks about
assault, written, verbal.
a physical assault.
Well,
It is interesting. Is it applicable to what happened? Was it a physical assault?
We have an intimidation or threat record.
If you look at page,
3A.
if you look at page 53 on our,
3A.
No, I'm doing the code of conduct because this is basically what I need to understand. There, under assault, it's talking about a physical assault against another student,
where he
verbal or
puts it
written.
in here.
Did he assault another student, verbal or written?
Sir, if you look at page 2 of this chart, prohibited activities, and if you look at number 4, assault, physical, verbal, or written,
One moment.
that's where it is, and this is what we base our code of conduct on.
Okay, just a second, I need to follow you.
Page
I'm not used to dealing with you.
Page
Where are
two.
you looking?
If you look on page 2 under Roman numeral 2 where it says prohibited activities and you go down to number 4.
Oh, you're back in the text. You left the chart.
I did.
Page 2. Prohibited activities in the word?
Assault, physical, verbal, or written.
It's not physical, is it? Okay. So it's verbal or written assault. It says intentional, spoken, or written threat. Was there a threat that was spoken, that was intentional? And where is it in your report? Well, you quote the language. Where in that language is there an intentional verbal threat?
As soon as he directed it towards a staff member with the choice of words that he had, that he used, it became intended for Mrs. Holmes.
But what were the words that you say were the threat?
You better watch yourself and you better get out of my face with that. I'm not CJ.
Okay. All right, so if somebody said that to you, you would feel threatened and intimidated then. Is that your statement?
Yes.
Okay.
The implication, words have meaning, you better watch yourself, you better get out of my face. Those were the words that I would constitute if I took those words and applied them to page 53 of the threats directed towards an adult. Yes.
Okay, now you're using your reference in terms of language and speaking, right?
I'm using my reference as far as how the teacher felt and how our team interpreted it based on what the code outlines it, as far as the definition, yes.
Right, but the code talks about intent. He had to intend to be threatening, is that true?
No.
Oh, okay, so you can threaten somebody without intending, then that's your statement?
Well, if you look at sentence number 2 in the board outlined language, verbal or written includes any intentional spoken or written or offer to do bodily harm to another by force under circumstances that create a well-founded fear of actual harm. That's why we always go back and we loop that second portion there, under circumstances that create a well-founded fear of actual harm. That's why, again, when I responded to Mrs. Rodriguez, why we go back and we talk to the student or we talk to the teacher, because again, under circumstances. And how, again, did you take those words?
Well, you were here when I was asking why you were trying to expel somebody who's moved out of the district. Mm-hmm. And I'll ask you, why are you trying to expel somebody who's moved out of the district? Because
my job is to ensure that I follow the handbook and I implement the handbook. So regardless of and while the offenses that, again, we took a long time in looking at, while the offenses, those took place during the school year, which was under our watch, which is when the code of conduct needs to be applied. I can't choose what month, what day, where a student lives. If they are a student of ours and they don't follow these points or guidelines and policies, then we need to, again, follow through.
Mr. Burrell, do you have discretion to apply these factors?
Do I have discretion?
Sure. Can you overlook them?
No. I am paid to follow the handbook, so I can't overlook them.
Do you ever overlook them?
I take things on a case-by-case basis, and I make a determination because of this incident, because of the way the teacher felt, and the real fear that she felt. This was one which the handbook needed to be followed.
You don't have a standard for how many times you get suspended before you're expelled, do you?
No.
Why 4?
52, on page 52, I can answer that for you.
Okay.
Because we were part of a team in making this recommendation. It says, depending on the severity of the offense or continuation of misconduct, And really, when we were making this decision, it was both a continuation of misconduct, but it was more the severity of the offense. More severe consequences than those outlined here may result, including recommendation for expulsion. That is the language when we look here, and we're looking at that pattern of insubordination and the we call it here, persistent disobedience. That's really what we looked at. So there's not a magic number, but there is when we look at the severity of the offenses, and making threats to staff members, to adults, is probably one of our most severe offenses that we would bring to this board.
Well, you say it's his fourth time. The first 3 times were not significant enough for you to expel him?
They warrant a suspension, and we truly don't use suspension that often. That's a severe offense.
Oh.
Or a severe consequence, I should say. We don't suspend students lightly.
You read may. May, M-A-Y. You have discretion about what you do then, right? Okay. So that's your judgment.
For some, but not all. Some of them are mandated.
Right, yeah,
Some
we're
of them
talking
are
about mandated offenses. Every offense you say that is justified expelling him, you made a discretionary decision, correct?
It's what I'm hired to do as a
Right.
professional, yes.
Have you ever interacted with Tim yourself?
I have.
And how?
I shared that with you earlier. I've interacted with him in the hallways. I've interacted with him on the basketball court. I've interacted with him in classrooms.
Have you ever interacted with him when he was not doing something in an appropriate manner?
Every single one that I just shared with you, I've interacted with him when he wasn't doing something inappropriately.
Oh, so you interacted and made decisions on each of the previous suspensions?
No.
No.
Well, then,
I thought you said if I've ever interacted with Tim.
right.
Those are the different settings and circumstances in which I've interacted with him.
I think, let me just clarify. I think he was asking you if you had interacted with him after inappropriate behavior. Inappropriate
Is
behavior.
that what you're
After,
asking?
Well, yeah, you're making a judgment. What?
I think she heard appropriate, and that
I
was.
thought you in a appropriate.
Oh, I'm just a little dry. Let me get some more water. Okay.
so if something were to have occurred in a classroom and Tim is brought down to the office, have you had the opportunity to speak with Tim at that time? No?
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Well, it answers that question. That's just as good as the one I have.
I'm trying
Now,
to move this along.
I know, and my half will be a lot shorter than her half. I'm sure. Okay. Now, what are the consequences of your having this board expel Tim? What happens to this kid?
Well, it's determined by the board.
What happens to a kid who's expelled in Michigan? You should know that, the principal, right?
I do, but each student is individual. I can't make a blanket statement about students. There's a lot of various factors.
Right, what are the consequences of this board expelling this kid?
It depends. It depends on if Tim would continue to pursue his education and access some of the resources. I think it depends on parental involvement. I think it depends on accessing his special ed rights. I think it depends on having mentors and role models like we have Mr. Woods back there and their role. There's various factors, but as I can see right here, it looks to me like he has a lot of support in his life. So, there's a number of different things that can happen.
Okay, Mr. Lurie. Mr. Merrill, I'm sorry. You suspended other kids, right? You participated in expelling other kids? I'm sorry? You have participated in expelling other kids?
I'm going to object to this line of questioning. How does it go to the issue of did the conduct occur and is the consequence appropriate as to this student?
Well, I appreciate that. First part, did the conduct occur? You don't provide me with anybody I can ask as to whether or not it occurred. witness that knows, other than like mine, who gave a different version, I think, is not here. So there's that issue. We only know what is reported, but we don't know if that's accurate. I didn't say true, accurate. We're dealing with perception. We don't contest certain words we said. But you are really looking at those words to a prison. In my community where I come from, those words are not a threat to a teacher necessarily. This particular teacher and principal is looking at it as a threat. Maybe it's supposed to be. I don't know. I'm not saying the kid is a perfect kid, but all I'm saying is you are about to do a significant impact on his life. And it's going back to that policy, which is a guideline, which is not binding. It's the issue. Does Okemos want to go on record as being a school that doesn't care about students and their future to the point that they are willing to kick them out, possibly ruin their lives, start them in that pipeline to prison just because they didn't like what they said in class and their behavior problem? Let me ask you this question. You know, and this is partly a legal issue on the behavior issue. Did the parent indicate to either of you that there were behavior issues here and that there was no plan for such a behavior issue?
Yes.
She indicated that to you.
She had referenced her concern that there was a behavior plan.
And what was your answer?
My answer was that at the time, the special education would be the ones who would put a behavior plan. They don't put necessarily specific behavior plans together. They're a regular education student. These kinds of things. They don't necessarily have a specific plan in place for regular education students. And because my understanding, again, back to the special education, his disability did not, in their eyes, warrant a math disability, warrant the initiation of a prescribed behavior plan because of her disability. If it's not diagnosed as compulsive or any of those other emotionally impaired,
Well, I know what you mean.
you're assuming that.
If the parent were to get a medical statement saying he was ADHD now and had a behavior problem, would you be willing to take him back?
I'm going to interject on that one.
Speculation.
No, it's not speculation. That's a matter of law. And clearly the school psychologist said if that happened, it would have to be revisited as part of the special education process. And that is not a decision either of these administrators make because it has to be made by law, by the Met team. And the document you have indicates that would be a course of action they would look at. We can't say conclusively what decision they would make. I think they showed their hand, perhaps.
Yeah, they probably did. And since you know the law about that, I don't practice in that area. If he suddenly had a diagnosis of being a behavioral disability person, and he was on expulsion status, did he come back?
He couldn't. The manifestation determination review has already been conducted. Certainly one of the responses to a previous question you offered, what opportunities, what can this student do if he's expelled in the state of Michigan? Well, first of all, in terms of the Okemos Public Schools, if he were to be expelled from the Okemos Public Schools because he is a special education student, by law, this school district must continue to provide a free, appropriate public education. Now, that's not determined by these folks. It's not determined by the Board of Education. It's determined by his IEP team. If he were to be expelled by the Okemos Public Schools and choose to go to another public school in which he resides, by law, that school has to take him as a resident under Section 1147 of the school code. And because he is a student with a disability and a special education program, they have 30 days from enrollment to implement the IEP. And indeed, if there is additional information, such as you suggest, with the work that the Okemos Public Schools has done and the 20-plus pages of documentation and all the support behind it, I would, if that school, wherever it may be, were my client, I would advise them to take a very close look at this additional information, convene a MET team, and determine if additional information now satisfies eligibility criteria. If indeed it's satisfied, then the student is deemed eligible and you reset the IEP for appropriate programs and services. Indeed, if the student is engaged in subsequent misconduct and is facing a removal from school for more than 10 days, then triggering the manifestation determination review, that piece would also be factored in.
Would it then be appropriate to suspend these hearings and allow him to get that evaluation with a medical exam so he can get readmitted?
No, I didn't say it was readmitted.
Okay.
That is not what I said.
Mr. Girl, you disproportionately expel kids of color.
I'm going to object.
You know what, excuse me, Madam
Yes,
Chair,
please.
I'm really, I don't want to be disrespectful to Mr. Spence and to the Stewart family for the time that we have, because we did ask an inordinate number of clarifying questions.
Right.
I really feel like the course that we're taking here with the questions and all to the administration, I don't know that that is, I can speak for me. It is not, I'm not finding this course significantly informative from a board standpoint to be able to make the decision that we are able to make here. And the course that the questioning seems as if it was taking, I don't know, I'm saying this board member does not feel comfortable with that. So I am hopeful that the questions that we are pursuing will help to advise the decision that we are making, or it is informing whether or not this procedure, the course of the questions that Mr. Spence was pursuing about what is that exactly is triggering where we are. If it is appropriate for us to have additional information that would advise the manifestation hearing from the medical reporting, I need to understand that from a legal perspective, not this objection and questioning and answering and all of that. This board member needs to appreciate from a legal standpoint, from the standpoint of where we are in the progression of these proceedings, what our options are. That is what I would find very informative. So, Madam Chair, I didn't mean to elaborate a long time. I just think that Mr. Spence did mention several very good questions. So I think that it would be informative for me to be able to have discourse with you, to our legal advisor, to make sure that I appreciate where we are. And if my fellow board, and Mr. Spence, I did not mean to interrupt your questioning or your line, but I would like to have more information about that. Are you with me?
I am with you.
Okay. And Madam Chair, I just apologize. I don't think I would find that very informative.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
If I
Mr.
may,
Chair.
before this, I am one board member who is concerned about the term that we've seen taken here today. And we each have a fiduciary responsibility to protect this district from legal liability. There have been a number of questions raised. I have been edified by some of the questions that Mr. Spence has raised. Some of them I had before they were raised. I've been concerned by some of what I've heard from what we have presented as a district. And one thing that I think we need to do at this point is not interrupt Mr. Spence and move in another direction, lest we allow due process in this hearing. So whatever it is that we're going to do, based on what Board Member Lynn has indicated, that's fine, we can do that. But Mr. Spence needs to be allowed to present his case in a reasonable time and manner, least we accused of not allowing due process to take place.
I would agree with that. However, presenting his case was not happening. The case was not being presented. It was questioning our administration on certain actions, which I don't believe were going to allow us to further our further our information and education on this issue. That's why I allowed Ms. Lynn to interrupt. That's where I'm coming from. If we were to follow the procedures, you know, we're still on the questioning from the family, the students' representatives, to the administration. We haven't even gotten to the point where the student or the representatives of that student have been allowed to tell us their side of the story.
Absolutely.
So I can be here till 3 in the morning. It's no problem. But I just want to keep it moving in a direction where we all feel like we're making progress. And I feel like at some point we're getting muddled up in some of the things that aren't going to help us determine if this recommendation is appropriate for the behavior. And that is our job here as a board. Do you understand?
Madam Chair, do I understand? Or
does everyone understand?
Or were you directing that at me?
Do you have a question for me?
Madam Chair, I'm just strongly suggesting to you that the last thing we want to be accused of is not allowing for due process, and we should just be careful in that regard.
And I think I'm trying to prevent that from
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Right.
Ms. Lynn.
Okay. Mr. Spence?
Yes, ma'am.
It is not my intention to deter the progress of your questions. I think that you have raised a lot of good questions, and it is important that we understand where we are in the questioning. I was asking that you allow us to take a moment to seek additional clarity based on the medical presentation of medical information for us to be able to understand from from the legal advisor where we are in that course. It's not advising me as a board member for you to ask questions and for her to answer your questions, because as a decision maker, I need to understand where we are in the course of that exchange. It would be helpful and advisable to me, and I'm suggesting to you, if you would give us an opportunity to pursue additional questions, lines of questions associated with that providing that medical information, it would help me to be more advised in the decision making. If you continue with 15 to 20 more questions, I might lose. I've actually stopped writing down the questions because it's been, there's a lot. So if you allow me to pursue some additional questions based on what questions you've already asked, it is not my intention to usurp your ability to present your case at all. Just if we can, as you took a break, if we can just take a moment and let me understand or ask some clarifying questions, I think that I would be more advised. If you feel that is not appropriate, if that is, messing up the course of your presentation of the student's position, you're certainly welcome to state that. It is not my intention to stop your progress.
Let me respond this way, ma'am, because I was an administrative law judge, I've been an arbitrator,